this class is really meant to be a platform or jumping board for you to undertake your own intellectual journey, okay? All right, so please keep that in mind. But we're going to look more closely at this question today, okay? Why is it that Jews are so dominant? So we will look at the beginning of the Jewish people. And I'm going to make the argument to you that Israel and the Jewish identity are constructs of the imperial imagination. Okay? And this is hard to understand, so I'm going to explain it to you slowly. But the idea is that because of its geographic location, Israel has always been historically important. And as a result, different empires have tried to manipulate the identity of Israel to best promote their own agenda or policies. Okay, so I know this is a hard concept to understand, but we'll go for it slowly. And again, we're spending like the rest of the semester on this major thesis of ours. Okay, so let's talk about history. Okay, so what we did last week is look at the cultures that have emerged out of Bronze Age collapse, and which are now going to dominate history. Okay, they are the Greeks, the Persians, and the Israelites. Okay, now we're going to look at how these ideas play out in history. But for us to do that, we first need to understand how history works. Now, I've identified 3 different patterns of geopolitics. Okay, and I want you guys to remember these patterns. The first pattern is this. This is really important I didn't understand. Competition within nation states are what matter, okay? Competition between nation states don't really matter, or they're not as significant as competition within nation states. And the idea we have here is elite overproduction. So what drives a lot of conflict is the fact that domestically you have these different competing factions, and they're all competing for power, okay? So you have too many elites, too few status positions, and so they're competing against each other. And this drives a lot of conflict, okay? So that's the first idea. Second idea is that the elite have shifting loyalties, okay? Think of Game of Thrones. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the TV series or read the books Game of Thrones, but everyone wants to be king, right? And they're going to kill their brother, they're going to kill their father, they're going to kill their mother to be king, okay? And so the elite don't really have loyalties except to themselves. The world is just a Game of Thrones, okay? Now, the third thing is that war can be a mechanism to protect the status quo. All right, the idea of equilibrium, in that sometimes the conflict is really bad. So what you do, you start a war so you can start off people to get killed. Okay, and that way you can maintain equilibrium within your system. And we'll see this we'll see this pattern throughout human history. Okay, so these are the 3 ideas I want you guys to remember as we move on and discuss world history. All right, so I want to give us an example for us to understand. Okay, think of the Warring States period of China before the emergence of the first empire, the Qing Empire. Okay, and as you can see from this map, China is divided into different warring states that are all powerful. And at this time in history, the Qing Empire, the Qing state is the poorest, it's most isolated, and it is the least advanced. Okay, you can see that Chu, Zhao, they are more powerful. And you could argue that eventually one of them would emerge to unite all of China, but they did not. It was the Qing, the isolated, marginalized, backward state that came to conquer. And so the question is, why did this happen? And so if we use our 3 principles, right, we can understand why. These different states are not competing against each other. It's the elites within these states are competing against each other, okay? Elite overproduction. So the way they manage this is for them to use warfare in order to maintain the status quo, to create equilibrium, okay? And how we know is, from this time emerges the idea of Chinese chess, right? What is Chinese chess? Chinese chess is the idea of warfare that is regulated, that is ritualized. Okay, so when we go to war, when we battle each other, we have to respect each other's the rules of the warfare. That's stupid. War should be about killing the other guy. It shouldn't be about following the rules, okay? Also, another piece of evidence is, at this time in history, Sun Tzu wrote the book, The Art of War. This is one of the stupidest books ever written, okay? I guarantee you, if you follow this book, you're gonna lose the war badly. Because this is really about how to cheat in a heavily regulated game, okay? So things like using spies, making a high ground, okay? They have all these rules. And guess what? In an actual war, none of these things actually work, okay? So if you look at history, I'm going to tell you exactly how to win a war, okay? And the way you win a war is, first of all, you have to be completely committed to winning this war, okay? Total warfare. Second is that if you want to win this war, you have to make sure that talent arises. So you have to be open and meritocratic, okay? If an officer, if a general is winning this war, you promote him. That sounds easy, right? But not if you're status quo power. Because what's important to you is to maintain that your family is always on top. So if a general arises who is very innovative, who's really talented, you kill him because he's a threat to you, okay? So the third principle is make sure your soldiers are happy. I know it sounds really simple, but again, if you're a status quo power, you don't really care. Okay? Destroy enemy civilian centers, siege warfare. Okay? Go and destroy the city because that's how they produce their war capacity, right? The food, the soldiers, right? Kill civilians. Destroy supply lines. Overstretch your enemy, divide and conquer. Strike fear in your enemy, kill their gods, okay? If you really want a war, if you really want to win a war, this is what you have to do. And we know because this is what the Romans did. This is what the Prussians did. This is what the Aztecs did. This is what the conquistadors did. Okay? This is what the Mongols did. Every single power that has conquered everyone else has done all these things, okay? So when they don't do these things, it's because these different warring states aren't actually at war with each other. They're actually friends, okay? They're all intermarried with each other. They're all trying to maintain the status quo. And they use war as a game in order to maintain the status quo, to create equilibrium, okay? So this is true for Mesopotamia, okay? Mesopotamia is important because remember, this is the cradle of civilization. This is where the first empires will emerge. This is where most technological innovation happens. This was for the longest time the wealthiest part of the world, okay? So remember, the idea of Mesopotamia is that the first city-state is Uruk, and then they will develop colonies throughout the Tigris and Euphrates, and then these colonies will come into war with each other. And they're all friends with each other, they're all intermarried, and the elite create these highly ritualized warfare, okay? And one really important rule is that you don't kill each other's god, okay? Because in their religion, the god lives in their temple. So you don't attack their temple. But guess what? All their money, all their gold is in the temple. Okay? So you're not allowed to steal each other's gold. That's stupid, okay? Because now, you really don't accomplish that much with warfare. So for the longest time, this was the status quo. And then what will happen is a man named Luca Zagazzi, okay? And you can think of him as lower nobility. So what we'll see in history is that within a city-state, there's always been a conflict between the upper nobility and the lower nobility, okay? The upper nobility is in charge. They want to maintain the status quo. The lower nobility want to steal that power, okay? This will happen in Rome, where Julius Caesar is of the lower nobility, and he will steal the power from the upper nobility, okay? The people call the Ottomans. And so Luca Zagazzi is from Umma, and he's like, you know what, screw this. These rules are stupid. I want to conquer everyone. I want to be the top dog, okay? So what he's doing that's very different from previous times is he's now going and ransacking each city's temple. So now he has the capacity to be able to build an empire. Okay? But by doing that, what happens is that the other city-states recognize him as a threat, and so they invite mercenaries from a place called Akkad to come and help them. Okay? And this leads us to the first world empire called the Akkadian Empire, named by Sargon of Akkad. Now, his name is interesting. His name means legitimate ruler. which probably tells us he's not a legitimate ruler. He's probably a mercenary like David who stole the throne. Okay, he saw an opportunity and he stole the throne. But this is a pattern in history where if there's competition among different city-states, the competition is not resolved amongst themselves because they have an equilibrium. So what happens is that an outsider, a mercenary, usually comes in who doesn't respect the rules, and he's able to unite everyone, okay, through innovations. So this is why the Qing dynasty, and not the Zhao or the Chu or the Wei, were able to unite all of China, because the Qing dynasty was committed to total warfare. They didn't care about your rules. They wanted to win, okay? All right, so as you can see, the Akkadian Empire stretches throughout the Fertile Crescent, okay? Conquers Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, extends over to Anatolia, and captures a lot of the Levant, okay? But this area, the Levant, is historically the most strategic location in the world. Why? Because it gives you access to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia. Historically, the three wealthiest parts of the world. So whoever controls the Levant is able to always threaten Egypt. Okay, and for most of history, this part, the Levant, was an Egyptian colony. But remember that after the Bronze Age collapsed, Egypt was no longer able to project power in the Levant, and so the different empires fought for the Levant in order to threaten Egypt. Okay, so Jerusalem is literally the center of the world. And we'll see that throughout history, people have considered Jerusalem the center of the world, both for religious reasons, but also mainly for geopolitical and trade reasons, okay? Now, the other thing to remember about this area is that it's highly competitive because it's hard to protect Mesopotamia. Okay, it's very, very wealthy, but as you can see, there are these mountain tribes over here that can always threaten Mesopotamia, okay? So this is a pattern in history where whoever established an empire in Mesopotamia is always being threatened by the mountains, the regions, the borderlands. Okay, this is a pattern throughout Mesopotamian history, and that's why these empires change all the time. Okay, so this is the Babylonian Empire. This gives us Hammurabi. Okay, then you have the Assyrian Empire. The Assyrian Empire is famous for their brutality. They'll come, if you rebel against them, they will kill everyone. Okay, they're notorious for their brutality. Now remember, at this time in history, an empire is not the empire of today where you can exert authority everywhere. An empire at this time is you're mainly controlling certain choke points of trade, and everyone else just sort of like goes along because it benefits them. Okay, so an empire is more like a loose confederation as opposed to a nation state. Okay, so this is the Assyrian Empire. And this is the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Okay, so you have these empires that constantly change over time. History changes when a man emerges called Cyrus the Great. Okay, Cyrus the Great is the founder of something called the Persian Achaemenid Empire. So last class we discussed Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism is really the first great world religion because it provides a simple but powerful model of how the world works. And Zoroastrianism is powerful because it encourages everyone to be their best, right? To seek Asha. Now, for most people, what Asha means is don't ever lie, okay? And it is actually a really useful thing if you're trying to run an empire. Because when you run an empire, you need soldiers, you need generals, you need administrators, right? And if people don't lie, if people are honest and moral, well, you can expand really quickly, right? And so that's what Cyrus the Great did. Cyrus the Great is also known for his mercy and his generosity. So when he conquers a place, what he will do, he will identify the best people, maybe even the king himself, and make them advisors to his regime. Okay, he's known for his tolerance. He's known for his openness. And so what happens is that the Babylonian Empire basically surrendered to him without a fight. Why? Because of elite overproduction, right? You have this war going on between the upper nobility and the lower nobility, and they're like, you know what? Let's just invite Cyrus the Great, and then we don't have to fight each other anymore, okay? And that's how Cyrus the Great was able to build the first world empire, okay? This is Babylon, the fall of Babylon, and Cyrus the Great. There are different stories, but one story is that the elite basically invited him in order to resolve their inner conflicts with each other, okay? This is a tomb of Cyrus the Great. It's still in Iran today. There's a story that when Alexander the Great, who was Macedonian, when he went to conquer the Persian Empire, he discovered that the Cyrus the Great, his tomb was in bad repair. They didn't really maintain or upkeep it, so he ordered for it to be properly maintained. Okay, that's probably the story is by the way probably false, but it shows you that at this time in history, about the year 300, 400, everyone. 300, 400 BCE, everyone was respectful of Cyrus the Great. Okay, Cyrus the Great is considered the world's greatest king or emperor. Okay, so as you can see, the Achaemenid Persian Empire is huge. Okay, it encompasses most of West Asia. Okay, so it goes from Iran all the way to Mesopotamia, to Anatolia, to parts of Greece, and basically all of Egypt and Libya. Okay, it's a huge area, and they were able to do this because of their innovations in religion as well as administration. Okay, all right. So let me explain. How do you rule empires usually? Okay, well, the traditional way is you control trade routes and access. Okay, so people have to pay you a tax to go through your trade routes. That's a traditional way. You can also use fear and conquest, and that's what the Assyrians were known for. They would come and they would kill everyone if you disobeyed them. You took hostages. That's a very common thing where you conquer people and you take the children of the king as hostages. Okay, intermarriage, religion. But what the Persians did really well that allowed for the Persian Empire to be so huge as well as to be really well managed are four things, okay? Effective administration. Again, when you have a religion, Zoroastrianism, where people can't lie, that's really good because these bureaucrats will now report real facts to the emperor, and that allows him to make better decisions, okay? Elite cooptation, meritocracy. And the idea here is that if you have a very effective administration that allows for local elites to focus their energies on trying to join this administration as opposed to rebelling against you. Communication networks, okay? So things like roads, things like postal networks, okay? So the Persians create the first global postage system. And it was really effective where if you want to send mail from Egypt over to Mesopotamia, what would happen is you would have these royal roads where people would ride on horses and they could stop at basically a hostile, rest, and then keep on going, okay? And that way you can very quickly move information from one corner of the empire to the other. Okay, and the last is to divide and rule. Divide and rule is really important. So what they did was they basically had different power centers within a region. Okay, so you had the satraps, which were the local governors, but then you also had the the bureaucrats. Okay, you also had the royal representatives. So these are different factions within a region. Okay, so divide and rule is probably the most effective way to control an empire. Okay, so now let's move on to Israel. Okay, we now know about the Persian Empire, how they managed their system and why they are so effective. Okay, now let's talk about Israel. So remember that we read the Bible, and the Bible came about because David needed to legitimize his rule. And after the Bronze Age collapsed, David created a Davidic kingdom in the Levant, because Egypt, Anatolia, Mesopotamia were preoccupied, right? But because the Levant is so important, this Davidic kingdom doesn't really last that long. It lasts like 80 to 100 years, okay? After Solomon, David's son, dies, Israel is divided into two parts. The northern kingdom, which gets conquered by Assyria, as well as Judah, okay, Jerusalem, which tries to maintain the Davidic kingdom, but doesn't last very long. at this time in history, the Israelites are being pulled in different directions, okay? The Anatolians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, because they're strategically very important. And so what's really hard for these empires is, how do we maintain control over Jerusalem? Okay, and they try different techniques. They try burning down their city centers, okay? So the Northern Kingdom was destroyed. You might have heard of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. They tried taking hostages, okay? But because this region is so volatile, nothing really works. And so the Jerusalem, the Israelites keep on rebelling, okay? So this is the kingdom of Judah. And what happens is, for the longest time, the Babylonians are trying to deal with the Israelites, okay? So they take hostages. Okay, they take hostages, like thousands of them, and move them to Babylon, where they become scribes, where they become farmers, where they become merchants. Okay, but again, the region is so strategically important that Jerusalem, the Israelites, they switch loyalties all the time. Eventually, the Babylonians are so pissed off that they decide to burn down their temple. Okay. And so, at this point in history, the Israelites are now gone. Okay, does that make sense? The Israelites are gone now. 587 to 6, we don't know when, but Babylonians destroy Jerusalem because they cannot, they tried many techniques to try to control Jerusalem. They can't do it. The Israelites are too rebellious. But it's too strategically important, so they destroy. So they decide, you know what, screw this. We'll just destroy the city. Okay. So when this happens, okay, this is really important to understand. The Israelites are gone. Okay. The people are still around, but the identity of the Israelites are now gone. 539. Cyrus the Great conquers Babylon. Okay, and he says, "I want the Israelites to return to Jerusalem." It's called the Edict of Cyrus, all right? And this is celebrated in the Bible. What is controversial is, why would he do such a thing, okay? Because again, the Israelites are now gone. The Israelites who went to Babylonia, they may still keep their religion a bit, but they no longer have their land. They have changed as a people, okay? So as an Israelite, you pray in the temple, but the temple is now destroyed, so now you pray in the synagogue, okay? So the people have changed a great deal. So the question now is, why would Cyrus the Great go to Babylon and say, you know what, I want you Israelites to return to Jerusalem. I want you to reconstitute the nation of Israel. Why would he do that? Okay, so this is going to be a debate that will never ever end, okay? So the Bible tells us that Cyrus the Great did this because God told him to do that. Really simple. God says, I love my people, the Israelites, send them home. Okay, and Cyrus the Great says, yes, of course, you're the great God, I'll do so, okay? Guys, that's not what happened, okay? Alright, so there are different explanations. Maybe the idea is that Cyrus wants to show all the Persian Empire, I'm religiously tolerant. You can practice your religion, you can celebrate your religion. That's what the Persian Empire is, an open, tolerant, generous empire, okay? That's true. What's also true is that Cyrus found himself as a righteous and merciful king who wanted to be generous to everyone, okay? So he saw the Israelites want to home, and says, well, go home, okay? It's also possible that there's a faction within the Israelites who supported his Babylon takeover, okay? I don't know if this is true, it's probably not true, but we consider that as a possibility. That the Israelites in Babylon supported his takeover, and so to thank them, Cyrus said, fine, I'll give you back Jerusalem. Another possibility is that when Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, he discovered that, you know what, these Israelites are really good administrators. And this is true throughout history because remember, the Israelites had their Bible. And the religion requires them to study the Bible. And as we discussed, the Bible is one of debate, openness, asking questions. And so these are very literate intellectuals. And they rise up very high in the Babylon administration. But this is true throughout history where Jewish people will rise very high in all empires, including the Islamic Empire, including the American Empire, okay? I think the the best reason for what happened is divide and rule, okay? So the idea is that you need to control the Levant. Because the Levant gives you access to Egypt, which is historically the wealthiest part of the world, okay? Whoever controls Egypt controls the world. So what you do is you set up a group of people in the Levant that are only loyal to you. Okay, does that make sense? Okay? You set up people in the Levant that only exist because you, the empire, allow them to exist. If you, the empire, did not support them, then the locals, everyone in that region would get rid of them right away, okay? And that's why we have the Jews. So the Jews were invented by the Persians to control the Levant. The Jews is actually a Persian term, okay? So before the Jews were, of course, the Israelites. Now we have the Jews. All right, so this is Jerusalem. And as you can see, what's really important to understand is that this is actually only a really small part of the Levant. But this part is specifically for the Jews. And it's part of this Persian province called Beyond the River, okay? And they call it the province of Yahu. That's why we have the term Jews, okay? Because they are part of the province of Yahu. And what's really important to understand is they're surrounded by enemies. The Sumerians are Israelites who have stayed in the Levant. Okay, do you understand? So most people around them are in fact Israelites who adapted to local circumstances. And that means that they practice different religions. That also means that they married foreign women as well. But they still consider themselves as Israelites, okay? Right? Does that make sense, guys? But what happens is that these exiles from Babylon, they come back and they say, no, we're the true Israelites. You guys are the false Israelites. The reason why we're true is we have stayed loyal to our religion. Okay? So what's going to happen over the next few decades is almost a civil war between Israelites who've stayed and Israelites who left but come back. All right? And this is what the Persian Empire wants in order to maintain stability in the Levant. Right? Because you have this small minority of exiles from Babylon who've come back, and this is divide and rule.